enjoy the rapport, enjoy the to and fro of creativity and music making, and it will be a much, much, much more enjoyable experience. And actually, that confidence will come naturally if it just feels like we are creating music together.
Welcome to Inspiring Voices, the podcast of the Sing Up Foundation. We believe in harnessing the power of singing to improve mental health and well-being for children and young people. I'm Baz Chapman, and in this first series I'll be speaking with inspirational singers, music leaders, researchers and other specialists to consider the unique role of singing, songwriting, voice exploration and creative music making in transforming young people's mental health and well-being.
Inspiring Voices, a new podcast from the Sing Up Foundation.
My guest for this podcast is Aga Serugo-Lugo, who is a vocalist, clarinettist, composer and workshop leader whose interests lie particularly in narrative-based community music making, focusing on accessibility and inclusivity. He's worked with, amongst many others, Music in Detention, Trinity Laban, MENCAP, Wigmore Hall, Sing Up, and numerous opera companies around the UK. He also co-runs Camberwell Community Choir and is ambassador for Britten Pears Arts Group A in Lowestoft and Ipswich. Aga, welcome.
Thank you. Welcome. It's nice to see you. Nice to be here.
Great to have you with us. So tell me, what's a typical day in your life?
The typical day, the joy of my job is there is no such thing as a typical day. So this particular morning, I was with young people in a hostel and songwriting, and then yesterday I was doing some presenting for Garsington Opera, a reduced version of the Barber of Seville at Garsington itself. So completely, that's a typical week. That's it.
That's fantastic, and what an amazing thing singing is, that it can link those two things together so easily. You know, they sit on the same spectrum, as it were. Tell me a little bit about the songwriting. Is that quite an important thing for you when working with young people?
Absolutely. It's really important for me that everybody who I work with that they feel that it's not sort of I'm a musician and they're just a participant. It's like we're co-creators in the same room, and so collaborative songwriting is super, super important for me to develop a rapport with the young people and get them to sing. If they're singing their own words, or even if they're part of the thought process that made those words, it becomes so much more meaningful. And even if it's a 4-line song that's just to be sung within that workshop, it really does mean something for those participants. You see them years later and they can sing that line back to you. I mean, that's just great because it stays with them.
So when we talk about singing for mental health, it is more than just, singing a song that might have a well-being theme.
Totally. Yeah, it's the whole thing. I mean, the starting point is breathing, right? Frankly, right? The simple thing. I did a thing with name dropped the BBC singers, about a year ago, and one of them had in a workshop said the fact which I thought was incredible, which I knew intuitively, but no one had articulated to me. The very act of exhaling for longer than you inhale is calming, right? So if you just breathe in for 4 and breathe out for 6, breathe out for 4, breathe out for 8, right? Breathe in for 4, breathe out for 10. Yeah, that is inherently a calming act, right? And then obviously the extension of that, the ritual of breathing, is really, really great for your well-being. Singing adds an extra element of that. There's a creative element to singing. There's the fact that the communal aspect of it, of singing with other people, or the opportunity of singing with other people. Songs come with stories, And with stories, with that storytelling element, there's an extra draw towards it. You're communicating both with the people who you're singing with in the room, but whoever composed that song, whether it be a formal composer or it be a folk song, you're connecting in some sort of way with the past, which I think is amazing.
You talked about an interest in narrative-based community making. Can you just say a bit more about what that means and why it interests you?
Certainly, because you mentioned in my introduction that I work with lots of opera companies, but I'm not an opera singer. And the reason why, touch wood, they asked me back is because I love telling stories with music. I love working with people who don't necessarily identify themselves as musicians, and us creating a story and that music being part of that storytelling. So that can be as small as with the Royal Opera House to do their family Sundays, and often there's a 20-minute session, so that's inclusive of the warm-up. So we often take a bit of an existing aria, and with that aria we make that the middle of their story, and they decide the start of the story and the end of the story, and we make up music for the start and the end, which is lovely. And that's got to be the whole thing's got to be over in 20-25 minutes. But that can be extended. That's the smallest version of that. But that can be extended with Snape Maltings and Group A, who you mentioned before. I made what I call a community-made beach opera. That was working with various groups, but mainly working with Group A. We'd set the story, which was the old man at the sea. But they created all the ideas for the music through a whole load of musical exercises over months and months and months. And then I wrote that up for small string orchestra and piano. So I had small string orchestra, piano, about just under 50 kids, and Rob Gilden, one opera singer we had to retitle it The Moderately Aged Man in the Sea. And that was all born out of their exercises and their ideas. And in addition to that, we actually had little boxes around Lowestoft asking for people's hopes and fears. And in the middle of the community opera, there was a moment where you're supposed to chant either your hope or your fear, depending on what part of the story we were at. So it was a really inclusive and immersive experience. And that's a larger scale. It's exactly the same thing as the 20-minute example, but it's just blown up in a larger scale with more thought and more resources.
And did you get a sense of what the experience of that did for those young people who were involved?
Totally. I'm totally transformative. For one thing, it's easy to forget those of us who work in the performing arts. It's easy to forget that a lot of people don't actually get that much opportunity to perform.
Yeah.
So for the Ipswich, this was Group A Ipswich, Group A Lowestoft. For the Ipswich kids, the opportunity to go to Lowestoft Beach was great. And for them, loads of them brought their parents, and guaranteed over half of those parents have never had a job opportunity to see their kids perform properly. Not least on a large stage, accompanied by a string orchestra. And so the pride in those parents' faces, the fact that they turned up was amazing. The pride in the parents' faces, the pride in the kids' faces was immeasurable. It's a thing, because they were part of the whole process and they could explain at length the whole process of coming up with the ideas, how they came up with through images that we created, they came up with little motifs, and how together we layered those motifs together to come up with what particular sections, how some of the lyric material were direct ideas that they had come up with. So they really took ownership of the whole process, and performances stay with people forever. A good performance, a memorable, unique performance stays with people forever, and that's so important.
Is there a risk at all in tapping into people's own stories, particularly if there may have been trauma in early life or something that has caused them to have issues of mental health?
Oh, absolutely, totally. And I mean, there are many rabbit holes and many pitfalls. And you have to establish at the beginning of any workshop, you have to establish boundaries, both your boundaries and theirs. And I would never ask. You have to be super careful with with particular topics. I'll give you an example of a particular topic. I did it was an exercise on exploring Christmas with teenagers, and there were so many things I did not say. I did not talk about. I didn't actually use the word Christmas. I didn't talk about things like presents. I didn't talk particularly about family because you just do not know. But even in that in that context, you could quite easily trip over. So as long as you are honest about you acknowledge the mistake, and as long as you say that you tried to avoid something, you pull back, and we go back to wherever the safe space is. You tend to be okay.
So there must be quite a fine line sometimes between something where you might be triggering something in a young person that could lead to potentially sort of a negative thing happening or a negative experience for them, versus bringing up something that might be quite difficult for them, but actually singing as a vehicle to do that in a way that they potentially wouldn't be able to do in any other circumstance. So I guess that's something you can't plan for?
Yes and no. Obviously, I don't know everybody's individual life stories. I think metaphor can do quite a lot of work, a lot of the heavy lifting, especially working with streetwise opera. You can deal with quite some tough subjects.
Tell me a bit more about what they do.
Streetwise opera work with people who have experienced homelessness, so they don't have to be presently without a home, but they have to have experienced homelessness at some point in their life. And streetwise opera do both drop-in sessions, which are episodic and work within themselves, and they also have each city that they operate in 3 cities: Nottingham, Manchester, London, and I work in London. And they also have a regular group who have bigger performances, and have a greater level of commitment that's expected of participants in the regular group. So, and streetwise opera do a lot of both devising based on existing operas. So looking at an aria, let's say from Madame Butterfly, looking at the situation from that aria, and then creating their own situation that maps onto that situation and their own music, sometimes incorporating the original opera, but also just creating their own stuff. So at the moment they're doing something called Rediscover, where they're looking at classical composers with African or Afro-Caribbean heritage who have been underrepresented, and they are responding to their original music and creating, by inspired by their music and also their life stories, their own small operas. So each city is doing their own small operas based on this 7 composers. So going back to your original question about the trauma and techniques to avoid triggering people, if you can approach exactly the same subject metaphorically, you often get a richer art form outcome anyway, but often it doesn't feel as though you're trying to personally tap into someone's life story.
And presumably also there is value in simply getting people singing together that doesn't always have to refer to their life story.
Yeah, it doesn't have to always refer to the life story. And a lot of the I've done courses on not just vocal health but also mental health and mental health and singing. And one participant in one course that I was involved in was actually involved in in North London there's a choir called the Mixed Up Chorus, which they sing the songs from around the world. The people are from around the world, and they sing songs from around the world. And this participant said, sometimes it's nice to sing to particularly address an issue as a protest, right? But also sometimes you want to sing just to totally escape, and to be in that moment another person, to step into someone else's shoes, and we all do that. I mean, that's a huge and rich part of life.
So fundamentally, why do you think singing is good for mental health and well-being?
Going back to my original point about the breathing, I think just in a warm-up, the most important part for me is the breathing exercise. That act of breathing as a community is so connecting. And there's something so primitive is the wrong word because it's used in the wrong context, but there's an essence to it that is so essential and so fundamentally human about breathing together, inhaling and exhaling together. It's incredible. And that, for me, there's that ritual of breathing and singing together that connects us within the room, but also, as I go into my previous point, when someone else has made the art, you're connecting with what they're trying to say, and often articulating their emotions. And humans are humans, so people's emotions map onto other people's emotions. You could, you read, I've never been a Russian dignitary, but I can read Anna Karenina and connect with that, But you can sing a song that has from Native Americans, and it has some sort of spiritual quality that you've connected with in some point in your life. You can sing something that's from South Africa that may be something about freedom, and you may not have had that exact experience regarding to freedom, but that desire to want to be freer is essentially human. And so that maybe that answers the question, that through the connection, you have a greater sense of your humanity.
So tell me about singing in your life. Have you always sung?
Yes, since I was little. I used to be in a song and dance company when I was about 4. So actually, I used to don't make me do it on the podcast.
Okay.
I actually used to be able to tap dance. It was very good. Step will change and all that sort of stuff. So in an interesting way, psychologically, now I think about it after you asking the question, I also connect singing with movement as well. In my head, it's always something's always happening as I'm singing. It can't just be totally still. Not that you can't sing whilst being still, but I associate it with something physical happening as you do it. And so I used to be in a song and dance company, and then I used to sing endlessly at school. So if there was an opportunity to be in the choir, I would join the choir. I was really lucky musically in the comprehensive that I had, which had a choir that encouraged us to read music, and it was split into SATB, well, as SATB as you can with a secondary school, because we're low on bases. But I was always encouraged by all tutors to use music as creatively as possible. And actually, in terms of tuition, because I'm actually more of a clarinet is where I've had music lessons in, but singing's always been a part of my life. So yeah, and I've met so many great people through singing. Actually, if I look at the list of my friends, quite a lot of them, I've just sung with them and then had a drink with them afterwards. To that point, taking it away from my life and thinking about exactly the same question, one of the interesting things about running a community choir is, which shows you the links between singing and mental health. After a really good rehearsal, or definitely after a gig, members of your community choir will tell you parts about their life that there is no other context in which they would. They will tell you about difficulties in their childhood. They will tell you about how they didn't actually really want children in the first place. They will just, as though it's the psychiatrist's couch, they will just unload a whole heap of their lives after singing for an hour, and it's just incredible how open people are in that context. And I think that links to my previous point about that idea of connection, that idea of like, oh, actually, we have just been breathing together, we've been singing together, and we've expressed the same thing together. Let me just tell you about my life. And it opens up this world.
And it's really fascinating, the rise of social prescribing, isn't it? Because that's a great example of something that drugs prescribed by a doctor are never going to be able to do for someone. And we're really excited about the possibilities for social prescribing and how it can help to connect people, open them up a bit, allow them to deal with the rigors of life. Yeah, that's great. Let's talk a little bit about the actual practice of leading singing in the context of mental health and wellbeing. We at Sing Up, we talk quite a lot about the sort of the special sauce, that there are some people that just seem to have this kind of way of being able to go into a room with almost any group of young people and somehow make it work. What are your observations about that, and how that comes to be? How can you connect with a group from Lowestoft and Ipswich?
Certainly. I would say, so this is linked to both singing and general sort of workshop, leading a group musically. What are the skills involved in leading a group musically? What are the quote unquote Pied Piper skills, but with the happiest ending?
Yeah.
So I always think leading, be it workshops or singing in general, there's a lot of, it's personality based. So I think whatever you bring to your leading, you should never try to avoid being you. Children can sniff inauthenticity from a mile off. And so whilst to lead in any sort of sense, you often adopt a part of you that feels like a bit like a persona, it is still essentially a part of you. So my first tip would be, never try to be someone you're not, because they'll sense it, and you'll feel uncomfortable at some stage. Go in there with confidence. Go in there, going back to what we previously said about safe spaces. Your role is to make that space feel as comfortable for everybody as possible. Where also in my workshops especially, I want to encourage people to feel comfortable experimenting with music, which is actually a really, psychologically, it's a hard thing you're not used to doing. You're not used to try something, and if it doesn't work, quote unquote, the first time, just try it again and see what happens. There's a lot of people who are just like, well, no, if I sing this, it'll be wrong, and then that's the end of the world. And it's quite hard to explain to me, no, it's not the end of the world. It's just the start of the rehearsal process. And to really explore your voice, to experiment exploring your voice, exploring what are the parameters of the music either you're giving or the music that we're creating. And to feel comfortable just like being part of an ensemble. That's the main thing. And you've just got to go in there with confidence. Be yourself, be authentic. Go in there with confidence and make the space comfortable for all.
There does seem to be this thing about fear of singing, doesn't there? That probably has all sorts of influences. But I remember in the early days of Sing Up, one of our biggest challenges was to overcome this sense that teachers had that they couldn't sing, probably because they were told when they were younger at some point that they couldn't.
Yeah.
Do you sense that that's kind of that's just an ongoing challenge to take out this fear?
That is an ongoing challenge, and then going back to my community choir experience, because this is where I've essentially been on the psychiatrist's couch with people. My community choir, Camberwell Community Choir, is a non-audition choir, and so there regularly people will say to me, somebody significant said to me, I couldn't sing, and then they just didn't keep going. Often the difference between singers, quote unquote singers, and quote unquote non-singers is the people who are quote unquote singers just ignored those people and just kept going. And I've always said to people in workshops and lessons, etc., in terms of giving people feedback, saying to someone you can't sing is the most non-productive phrase you could ever imagine. Because actually, even if the more accurate thing is, here's a note, they sing a note, and the more productive thing is to go, here's where the note I want is, and here's where your note is. Let's try and move it in that direction. Now, that process could absolutely take years to improve and to get closer, but mark my words, it will always improve if your approach is, here's what I would like from you to get us to there. And I always remember somebody was telling me about they were talking about an improvement of musicianship in general, but obviously it applies to singing in particular. If you think about marathon runners, or people, normal people who run marathons, right? If you go in there saying, I'm going to run a marathon, it's not very helpful. The starting point is, I'm going to get off the sofa. And then I'm going to walk for a little bit. And then a few days later, I might try and run around the block. And then maybe a few weeks later, you might go for half a mile. Then a few weeks later, you might regularly go for a mile every few days. And that's the building block. Yeah? And then months later, you try for 5K. Months later, you try for a 10K. It builds up, build up, build up. But making that starting point, I need to be a marathon runner, is really unhelpful. It's actually, music starts with a single note, right? Let's have a go at that note. And what can we do to improve that single note?
But does that mean sometimes you'd be working one-to-one to if, for example, there's an ongoing issue of, say, pitching that might be a fairly regular amount below the pitch you want, you might do that one-to-one rather than try to make it work as a group? Yeah.
I mean, in truth, in the context in which, most of the context in which I run music sessions, it's usually with a group. If there's a particular individual issue, I'll work with someone. And it's really often, with all these things, just thinking about something, consciously thinking about what is actually happening, often improves something so much, right? I mean, going back to the, what is useful, what is not useful to say, just literally just pointing to someone and just going, could that just go higher? And if you're regularly saying that, it's like, and that the thing that music leaders often say, could you raise your eyebrows a bit and smile, and have some joy in your face, and that will raise the pitch. Makes such a world of difference. So when I say I would talk to someone individually, I would talk to somebody individually, but not at any great length. I'm not an individual one-on-one singing teacher, but I think just being aware makes a massive, massive difference.
I wanted to ask a bit about so as someone who might describe themselves as a non-expert. So it might be, for example, a teacher in a school who wants to get singing happening, particularly in this context. What's your advice for someone who sort of might be fearful of doing anything for fear of getting it wrong? Or what kind of a structure could they set up to get something really successful happening?
Well, I would say, obviously, given that I'm talking to Sing Up, there are great resources online.
Thank you.
There's your start. There's your starting point. Ask around, like for other people that have started. That there'll be other people in exactly the same shoes who've had no formal music training, who just started choirs, or who are the most common example of this I know is in primary schools, teachers in primary schools, because very often the music lead has not necessarily had formal music training, and they're just asked to either start the choir, or could you lead the singing and the assembly, and they their heart leaps out, etc. My other bit of advice would be, whatever you're going to do, practice it for yourself, so that you feel comfortable with what it is you do, and acknowledge, going back to that marathon analogy, acknowledge that you're going to get way better at this the more you do it. And my best bit of advice, I would say, when you're leading a group, right, the joy of it is a bit like when people talk about the joy of drama. Okay, the joy of drama is actually the relationship between characters. Characters are interesting, right? But in order to have a decent story, one character has to have a relationship with another, and that change of the dynamics and all that sort of stuff is the thing that keeps us all hooked on a drama. It can keep us hooked for 7, 8, 9, 10 seasons of whatever. Okay, the joy of leading a music group, is the rapport you have with the group. And so if you set out to enjoy that rapport, what you think of ostensibly, because it's the fear of it feeds itself and makes the problem significantly worse. If you enjoy the rapport, you'll find that actually the mistakes, quote unquote, that you make are actually part of the fun. We're all friends and we're all enjoying, we're all fellow creatives in the room. You made a mistake. The world keeps spinning. Do it again. We all do it together. Let's work this bit out together. Okay. We've sorted it. Then we move on. If you leaving the whole world on your shoulders and feeling as though you've got to be the absolute expert on everything, sets up barriers that just simply don't need to be there. Enjoy the rapport, enjoy the to and fro of creativity and music making, and it will be a much, much, much more enjoyable experience. And actually, that confidence will come naturally if it just feels like we are creating music together.
So you can flip the fear feeding the fear to the joy feeding the joy. Exactly. So my final question, Aga, could you share a particularly inspiring vocal moment from any time in your life, and what was it about it that made it so inspiring?
One of my favorite moments that made me absolutely solidify in my mind that I was going to enjoy teaching singing, enjoy workshop leading, was actually, strangely enough, was for Sing Up. This is 2010. I can remember the exact year, 2010, and I had led for a year and a half a large community-based Sing Up project, and so it was the final performances of all these groups, and one group that didn't come from initially the initial Sing Up project it was just a school in Bedford. This is where the project was based. A school in Bedford who had asked me to deliver some stuff with their secondary school kids. And we'd been working on songs that they were interested in. And because I had this Sing Up event where other groups that I've been working with were singing inclusion, about 150 kids. There was an opportunity for those other kids to come along and sing their songs in the concert. And they came, and some of them were very nervous about coming. And one of them who wanted to drum almost like left because he was so nervous. And I was like, you're gonna drum for this. And he did drum eventually. But there's a song called Broken, and there was this boy who, this is 10 years ago, so he's clearly a dead man by this point. And he led this song, and I remember him, he carried himself so beautifully well, got the audience to clap along, but most importantly, he had like about 150 kids behind him, like primary school kids. He was a secondary school kid. And he got them to clap with him, and they loved it. And it really, a word that I've used a lot for this podcast is connection. But that in many other contexts, nobody would hypothetically say, here's a guy who could connect with 150 kids who he's never met before, like that. But in that context, they loved hearing his voice. He loved performing. He really loved that song, and he loved that song, and it so showed. But he could get these children, like, they instinctively understood they had to clap with him and like sway with him, and it was really a really, really magical performance. And it totally made me think, I've got to do this forever. Because if I have little moments like that, I've got to do this forever.
Yeah, what a way to finish what a powerful example of the value of this work, the value of bringing people together to sing in any context. I feel like I could chat to you all day about all of this stuff, but we must draw it to a close. Aga, thank you so much for sharing your experience, your story, and so many inspirational ideas. Thank you.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you.
This is Inspiring Voices, the podcast of the Sing Up Foundation. Join us for the rest of the series on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, and other major platforms. You can also watch the video of each episode on the Sing Up Foundation YouTube channel.
Inspiring Voices, a new podcast from the Sing Up Foundation.